everyone. So here is me, obviously. And I'm Luca Cipriani. I work for Arduino already in the last 3 years. But I worked in the last couple of years on web IDEs. So when joining Arduino, we started as basically a hardware company that was famous for something like this. So physical hardware, I say, but I'm more like a DevOps web engineers. So how can we interact with physical hardware? So it's kind of be really, really crazy. And also with those kind of hardware, which is really, really embedded hardware, like the one that we spoke just a few minutes ago. So 64 kilobytes of RAM. So that's almost the same size of some Arduinos. But some of those Arduinos are more complex, likely, and they can be embedded in other products. Now, the fact is that the whole world in the last couple of years, I would say, is shifting from programming, desktop programming, to web programming. And that was a big deal for Arduino, mainly because of this, because you have already a huge community, and you want to port this huge community to using a web IDE, but still programming physical hardware, which is kind of weird because you need a website that speaks with your hardware. Now, this is kind of happening already with your mobile phones and some nice APIs that, I don't know, Android or iOS provide. But for everything outside the mobile world is really, really hard to do. So our idea was ambivalent. From one side, we wanted to move makers and start using desktop application and cloud applications. So we wanted to migrate makers from physical hardware to start programming in the web. And on the other side, we wanted web developers that are really a huge community, and probably most of you are web developers, start playing with physical hardware, and that was really, really a nice thing to do. So everything else was about security. Security in the web space is widely explored, but once you want to basically exploit your physical hardware with the web, there are a lot of security implications out there. Just to give you a little more background on our project, our desktop application is really made by a large community. It's downloaded once every 2.4 seconds. So it really means millions of Java downloaded IDE every day. The product is super mature. It's 12 years that we have this Java offline desktop application, and everything is monolithic. And we have more than 40 developers joining the community, basically exactly using GitHub. And then we had this incredibly new project that was a web IDE. So we had no user, so 0 users, so no testers. But we wanted to make it completely modular. So initially, because it had to run in the board that I've shown you before, it was done by using CoffeeScript and Angular, and then we migrated away just using Golang and again Angular. But we were only 3 developers, basically, 1 UX designer, and me as a web architect. So it was quite challenging. This is the old Java IDE. And despite the fact that everyone, the first time looks at it, it says, oh, it's really ugly. It's horrible. It looks so 90s. It's one of the most used IDE in the world. So it's downloading more than 10 million times every single year for 10 years in a row. Okay, so it's really a massive amount of developers using this. And not only developers, because if you look at it, there are only 2 buttons on the top left that are really, really visible. One is compile, the other one is upload. And you don't need anything else. There is no file navigation out there. So it's a completely new redesign of what people were used already starting, I would say, in the 70s. You have files, and everyone basically was teaching that you need to program a file. No, what we are seen as UX designer is that you need to make stuff, and you don't care how you do that. So it can be visual language, it can be, you don't care about file, especially designers or architects. They don't care about the internals. We, as developers, we do care quite a lot. So I feel this is really not enough powerful for me, but for the majority of our users, it is already. So nice. This is the evolution, so the web application that we built in basically 1 year of work. So we tried to bring everything that was good of the old IDE plus some new interesting feature in a web application. But there was one huge point about this, that it was running on the web, so it's relatively, let's say, easy to have a nice website with AngularJS. Okay, that's fine, but then it has to speak with your hardware, and this is kind of impossible unless you start using really heavily OS APIs, but it's not always possible. And it had to run on all the major known browsers out there, so Safari, Edge, Chrome, and Firefox. Obviously, I'm not mentioning Internet Explorer because, you know, it's not really a browser, probably. But, but it's not the only one. I will show you that someone else is on purpose not respecting W3C specification because they want to break things. So it's nice. So is web development easy? How many of you are web developers? I would say absolutely the majority. You will say that probably it's not easy to be a web developer. But I can assure you that it's easier than being a hardware developer. So don't be scared too much. So web dev is relatively easy because you have HTTP and HTTPS. Now you have HTTP2, which is quite fancy. More or less, the world is moving to JavaScript and JSON, which is, at least if you read a file, you can understand what's going on. You more or less have REST API, unless you have to use something like SOAP, XML, and use for a bit. But more or less, you have standard protocols. So HTTP is widely known by, I would say, everyone. Hardware development is a bit messy. So there are no standards at all. Every new vendor of hardware start just doing their own standard, which is not a standard anymore. And you sometimes, to program something, have to rely on OS API. So once you write a driver for, I don't know, Linux or Mac or Windows, it's completely different code base. You have to redo all the same features, on and on. And even for the protocols, there is no standard. So USB, now you have SBA, SB2B, USB-C, but different version and implementation of USB-C. So sometimes if you plug a battery pack on your Mac PC, the Mac could think that it has to recharge the battery pack, so everything explodes. So it's not really nice, just because there are no standard protocols at all. So if you combine them, so if you do web development plus hardware development, it's gonna be a real mess. It's a completely real mess, because everything is so confusing. There are no specifications. They are not really intended. So in the idea of the web, there was no intention to make it speak directly with hardware. Absolutely. When Tim Berners-Lee wrote the specification, he basically didn't care about this use case. So I thought a bit in the past and say, okay, why not we use cups? So not cups. So this is a cup of coffee made out of an Arduino. You can see it's a nice project, actually. But I didn't mean this one, but this one. Cubes was this system that allows you, especially on if you have a Mac or Linux, if you go to localhost port 631, you get a web interface, and you can actually manage your printers from there and do nice things like creating a PostScript and do many, 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 many interesting things. Just check So it was a nice idea. As you can see, even if the project started in 1999, it was quite complex already because you had this Linux interface and application. Then you had different input formats like text files, PDF, or many other different things. Then you had to process everything, create a PostScript, which is basically the language used and understood by printers. Then you had to create a sort of protocol with application VND PostScript, pass those information to the CUBES raster, which is something that basically converts again by using the driver of your printer, and then sending everything through the wire and do different things if the connection is local, like using kind of USB. The protocol was named IPP, or by using a network connection for our remote printer. So quite complex, but still probably the most effective way known so far to actually interact with your hardware by using a web interface without becoming crazy. There was a fact that server was running in localhost, so it's relatively easy to gather data information from our localhost server. The problem is, how can you manage that from the web? There are no APIs at all. So I'm going to show you again the image before. So the image was the web IDE, but if you really take a look at the corner, there is a really tiny small icon that saved our life. That tiny small icon, I'm going to zoom it a bit, is made by an agent that is able to talk with your USB devices and expose everything by using a web interface. So that was really the key of our architecture, because we had also some other competitors, and they had to maintain different plugins, each from every browser. That means a massive amount of work, and you probably are not aware of the fact that, or maybe yes, but I hope for you not, that the web APIs of every single browser change every more or less 6 months, and they deprecate everything every couple of years just because they don't like it. So that is actually our own agent running on our machine. So we have localhost and a port, and then going back and forth via WebSocket or REST API, you can query your devices. So we can ask something like, give me the list of your network devices or your USB connected devices or something like that. So very simple idea. Now the problem is, again, to speak with your website. And if you look at this, now it is localhost and 8991 is the port, and it is in plain HTTP, but obviously our website is in HTTPS. So what happens if you call via HTTPS an external website using JavaScript that is using plain HTTP? That you get a mixed content error. I'm going to tell you about this a bit more later on. Then there was another really big challenge. So it's not just a technical challenge, but there is also a human challenge, and technical challenge usually can be solved. So unless really physically impossible, if you have enough people, clever people, and enough time, maybe infinite time, you can solve a technical challenge, but solve debates and fights within teams is really hard. So we had the web team loving interpreting languages, JSON, dynamic typing, concurrency. Okay, all nice things. And the hardware team that say, no, we want everything compiled statically. We do use streams and not JSON because JSON or everything about HTTP is super slow. So we want strong typing, and we want multi-processes and not concurrency. We want parallelism. Okay, it's fine. So let's try to make a deal and have either everyone unhappy or everyone slightly happy, let's say. I prefer this second version. And just pick some of the things that you want from each team. So I picked 2 different features for each team, and that actually were the Y, B, W, and D. So it's basically win by your decision. And it was a great decision because we started with this project, the Arduino Create agent, that is able indeed to create this agent, run on your PC, and expose those REST APIs and WebSocket APIs to speak with your hardware. But actually, this is just the start of everything. Now it's going to be very, very, very hard. So we picked Golang, which is a very nice language. It has some defects, but given all the modern languages, we needed something that was really efficient. And I don't know, compared to Rust, we need something that new graduate can pick in a couple of days and not years. And we needed to convert serial string to WebSocket. We need a REST API and concurrency. So that is listening on HTTP and HTTPS on localhost. Then we had to move to 127, which is slightly different than localhost because DNS are not involved here. So we had a prototype working. And then we figured out before publishing it that we had to take care about security because it's very, very, very easy to do IoT in an insecure way. So there are out there, I think, many different vendors saying that they are doing IoT since 80s. And then if you look at them, they are basically not using any secure protocol. There are no keys involved. There is no cryptography, no encryption, nothing. So we have this agent running locally. And we have a website that can speak with it. What wrong can happen? I don't know. Basically, that someone can see your keyword and do a nice keylogger by using a website. Very nice project. So we created basically a botnet of a couple 100,000 users that already have an agent installed, and everyone can run arbitrary command on their hardware. That's not something that we wanted to do. So the first thing we did was to add a signature in every request and be sure, so the agent is sure that who is sending the request is exactly our own servers, not some random attacker server. And then there is this problem. We wanted a nice flow for the user so they can get started, have everything secure, as just exposed, but the real issue was that had to work in every browser, and this is really impossible. So it cannot run on every browser, just because, you know, human beings. So the main fact is that we still don't have artificial intelligence writing browsers. That's probably an issue we have to solve together with some other developers that spoke before me. So if you look at the specification, everything looks fine. So you can have an HTTPS website that is speaking with your localhost in plain HTTP because that's what the specifications say. Because localhost is a trusted environment, you are not going to have mixed content, so you are not going to be blocked. The alternative that you have, that's actually what we use for the browsers that don't respect the specification, is to create a certificate authority, so you have a green lock in localhost, which is something potentially nice for the user, but also very scary, because if someone is able to steal your key, they basically can in-person being localhost, but that is actually a certification authority, so they can just change the URL of your bank account and still have the green lock, which is, you know, a high security issue. So the Chromium developer did something very interesting. So they said, because of those issues, we are gonna open HTTP 127.0.0.1 and don't block it with mixed content, because this is actually more secure for the user not to do that than doing that and having that just pressing agree to everything. So good catch. That was in June 2016 for Chrome developer, and Mike West is probably one of the biggest experts in the world about mixed content and coarse requests. Okay, then the Firefox developers started to be a bit scared, because they say there is a specification, and Chrome, which is now the most used browser in the world, already applied the specification. So fast enough, just 1 year later, at least they delivered the fix, which is good. I mean, not exactly as fast as we wanted, but still we have a fix. Then finally, Windows Edge also did the same fix, and I was a bit surprised, but it's kind of working, so it's fixed, not yet flighted, so it's not being deployed yet, but at least they have a fix, and it's gonna be in your next release of Windows. But for Safari, that's not the case. For Safari, when someone opened the same bug, they say, no, resolved won't fix. They want to respect the W3C specification, because they feel they are too unsecure for the user. So best to not try to change the specification, but best for the user just to don't respect the specification at all. So maybe, I don't know, tomorrow they can say, no, HTTPS, we don't like it. The specification say it has to work this way, but we don't want to use asymmetric keys. We want to use symmetric keys, and your website is not going to work. It's fine. So it's going to be really, really, really hard. What we had to do was to implement different solutions and tell the user, look, if you use certain browser, your user experience is going to be a bit weird, but still works. Otherwise, you're going to have a very, very nice experience. And about the browser. So please never use native browser's API unless you are on mobile. This is really a suggestion and advice I give to you. Please don't do that, because someone based their product on MP API in Firefox. Someone else based that on native client APIs in Chrome, and they were both either removed or completely changed with really like 6 months of deprecation time. This was true, but not entirely true for Chrome OS, because I don't know how many of you know Chrome OS, but Chrome OS is really an OS that is just a browser, basically, and you cannot really talk with the hardware. So for us, it was a bit hard, because Chrome OS is widely known in every US school. So US schools buy the Chrome OS because it's extremely cheap, and then they want to take Arduino courses because students ask for that. So you have hardware that basically doesn't have an OS, and you cannot really speak with that. So in that case, we used the Chrome OS API, and likely the Chrome people are good enough to listen to their customer, and they told us, you can keep using those API because it's the only way to speak with your hardware. So good. More in general, as an advice, don't ever use APIs, browser APIs, unless they are extremely stable. Don't do that, please. There is another new protocol to actually speak from the web to your physical devices. This is named WebUSB. It's still in a draft, but at least it's trying to address all the issues that we have found so far. So security, control, speed, and avoiding having a single small agent running on your system. But you can do that directly using the browser, which is very, very nice. As you can see, it's a draft. It was updated the 30th of May this year. And what it says is that this document describes an API for securely providing access to universal serial bus devices from web pages. So we are gonna be there, but still, in 2018, there is no way to control your USB devices from the web. I would say we made something wrong in the past, probably. We had to think about that. It was kind of obvious. So I'm going to show you now the capabilities of our system and what we built on top of it. On top of it, we built a system to manage your physical devices, and it doesn't matter if it is your local machine or some server sitting somewhere. And it doesn't really matter if you want to use HTTP, because HTTP is very, very nice for hardware that is capable to do that. So for us, like a Raspberry Pi is an impressive piece of hardware. But an Arduino Uno is extremely small, or if you have a Mega 1000 that is able to have Wi-Fi, but it doesn't have an OS on it, so you cannot rely on HTTP, HTTPS, or that kind of super fancy protocols. You have to use something like MQTT protocol, co-op, which is a kind of HTTP over UDP, or something that's super, super, super lightweight. So you can send on Sigfox, which is another radio protocol. You can send a payload of just few bytes, and still doing sensor activities and sensor management. Because you have not just millions of devices, but you have billions of devices. Just to mention HARM, the company that basically did the design of probably all of your mobile phones, more or less sold the design for 12 billion devices per year that potentially can be managed remotely by an IoT platform. And 12 billions, trust me, is quite a huge number. Even if you just send a couple of bytes per second, it's still, you know, a couple of terabytes per second. Not bad, not that bad. If you imagine that I was working for another project and having the whole firehose, so real-time data from Twitter was more or less in terms of less than 10 terabytes of data every day, not every second. So what you can do with Arduino Create Device Manager, you basically can configure your online server, Raspberry Pi or whatever it is, and send data by using different protocols. Now we do support HTTP and MQTT, and you can also just have a web interface to see what's going on your server. And let's say your server can also be a Raspberry Pi or a BeagleBone, so something super constrained. And you can also run Arduino software on top of it, and most interesting for you, you can also run Docker containers in it. I'm going to show you that in a moment. So we support MQTT, co-op, HTTP, WebSocket, and for us, a web client, a browser, is just another kind of things. It's an IoT device. It's just running on your own desktop, while your own desktop is a physical device, and is for us an IoT device. You just have to extend a bit the idea of IoT device. The web clients are smart enough to understand HTTP. And then you have the sensors, because the real thing is that you are gathering data if you have some sensors, temperature sensor, humidity, motion sensor, whatever it is, that you want to send on the wire by using protocol X. And you want to either have physical sensors, but also you want to simulate a massive amount of sensors to see if your framework is going to scale or not. So I'm going to show you, just because we are all, most of us, web developers, and now, you know, everyone is happy about Docker containers, so just speak about bus board, you are able to deploy Docker containers on top of your Raspberry Pi or on top of your remote server by using a web interface. So here, my colleague Fabrizio is deploying a container, then it shows up in the terminal. Then another my colleague is deploying another container from the web interface and sending a message via MQTT. We are running Docker run on the target server, which is kind of nice because everything is an AngularJS application internally running in the browser, sending data via MQTT to the device without knowing the IP address in advance. That's the main thing about IoT. Because if you have an SSH server, this thing is really super simple to do. But if you don't know in advance the IP address of your device, then you can do anything. So the fact is you can also start and stop Docker containers. This is something we are going to release by the end of June. And the main thing is that every time you have a new device and you register them is basically means create a new key. As soon as they go online, they will try to find our server and declare themselves as alive. So you don't have to really already know the network configuration of your device, because it can also change or can be behind a proxy. So this is our new vision of having IoT. The idea is users, so you and me, think about things as just something like, I want my smart lamp and turn it on and off by using my phone. Okay, I can control that device by using an Arduino. So I plug the Arduino in my PC. Now I can create a new thing. I will name it Cloud Lamp, attach it to my Mega 1000, which is inside the lamp, go next, and then create my own widget, like to see the status on and off for my lamp, or if I want to change the color of my lamp, or if I want to change the intensity of my lamp. This is our vision, and this is what we are working on. So it's really shifting from having just HTTP to HTTP devices to have, as I said at the start, so people and also us as web developers or developers, we don't care too much about how everything is implemented. I mean, it is fine. We are scientists, so we love doing that, but we have to deliver. We need to do something that is interesting for us, that is interesting for our users, that is useful for the humanity. We should stop doing, I don't know, AI for no reason. We need real tests and real use cases. That's the whole point about IoT. We are not using IoT just because it's fancy. Why Arduino is working and delivering IoT only in 2018 and not in 2012? Because we wanted to do that the right way, not just ship something that is not secure, it doesn't make sense, and you need to be a rocket scientist or PhD, you have a PhD in computer science to do that. This is just 5 clicks away, and my son, not yet, but in a couple of years, probably, she is now just 1. So in a couple of years, she can just go next, and create her own lamp, which is nice. So thank you, everyone. If you want to contact us, just send us an email. If you want to test what you are seeing, just go to create.arduino.cc. We are continuously hiring, and you also have my contact. So thank you for the nice conference, and enjoy it.